folks, Darren from Astronomy. I'm out here in gorgeous Jasper, Alberta in the Canadian Rockies, and I'm going to give you a rundown on everything the Fornax mounts LighTrack II can do. We're going to cover all the nuts and bolts, so I hope you enjoy this video.
One thing that's crucial for any kind of astrophotography is a stable foundation. You're going to want a really solid tripod that's going to be able to take the weight you're going to put on top of it. You also want to make sure that it will not be susceptible to any kind of wind or vibration. Here we have a Manfrotto tripod with an adjustable half ball that is very similar to the new Fornax FMTP10 tripod. This half ball makes leveling very simple, however it is not a requirement. You can use almost any kind of tripod as long as you make sure that it is stable. Now here we have our LighTrack II. We're going to mount our LighTrack II to our tripod using one of several different methods, which we will discuss. On the back of the LighTrack II, you'll notice that there is a 3/8 inch tripod thread with a 1/4 inch reducer. And there are 2 threaded holes on either side of this central attachment. These holes are for the wedge, and this one is for attaching to a quick release plate. One common way that you may wish to mount the LighTrack is by using a 2 or 3-way tripod head, such as this geared head. In the case of this particular type of setup, you only need 2 adjustments to attain polar alignment. You will need an altitude adjustment or a vertical adjustment, and you will need an azimuth adjustment or a horizontal adjustment. A geared head is a really convenient way to polar align your mount, and indeed it's a useful piece of equipment to have in general for photography or for astrophotography. If you already have one, you may wish to use a geared head, or failing that, a 2 or 3-way tripod head. In the case of any of these options, you're going to attach your LighTrack II to the quick release plate on the top of the attachment, and you're going to use the vertical and horizontal controls to attain polar alignment. Here we've attached our quick release plate to our LighTrack II, and we can use it to easily attach to the top of our geared head. Using the geared head, we can now adjust both the altitude and azimuth. And this is how you will polar align your mount if you're using this type of tripod head, or if you're using a 2 or 3-way tripod head. The strength of a geared head, however, is that you can make fine adjustments, but either way, you should have a very functional setup. Now, many tripods come with ball heads, and you might be tempted to use this to mount the LighTrack II to your tripod. However, this is not recommended just based on the fine adjustments that you will need to make during polar alignment. Here, even with this rather robust ball head, it's very difficult to get the appropriate fine adjustments that you would need to achieve a good polar alignment. And often, even after you do achieve what looks like a good alignment, you might tighten the ball head up only to find that there's some sagging. It's for this reason that I would recommend that you steer clear of using a ball head, at least for mounting the LighTrack onto your tripod. Now, another way that you might wish to mount your LighTrack to the tripod is with the FMW200 wedge from Fornax Mounts. This wedge is produced specifically for the LighTrack II and is very robust. It's machined out of solid aluminum, so it is incredibly stable, and it's also a very convenient way to polar align your mount. On the bottom we have a 3/8 inch tripod thread, which will connect directly to our tripod. If your tripod has a 1/4 inch thread, you can use a reducer in the bottom of the wedge to help attach it to that thread. Here we just simply twist it on, tighten it up, and we're ready to go. You'll notice on the wedge that there is an integrated bubble level, which will allow you to get a very accurate level on the wedge and therefore the LighTrack II. The wedge features two sets of adjustments, one for altitude and one for azimuth. These adjustments will be very familiar to anyone who has polar aligned an equatorial mount in the past. On the other side of the wedge, we can see that there is a degree scale and a marker in a cutout channel. This can help you roughly align your mount if you don't have access to a polar scope. It is, of course, preferable to polar align with a polar scope or a polemaster, and you will get the best alignment this way. However, if you're shooting wide field, in a pinch, this rough alignment can be workable. The red controls on the wedge are used to adjust the altitude, and once attained, the black locking rings can be tightened up to keep it in place. There are 3 black lock screws located on the base of the wedge, which are used to lock things in place. You will use these 2 azimuth controls to push and pull the wedge and mount back and forth during polar alignment. And once properly aligned, you will tighten these controls up against the central post. At this point, you will lock the 3 black thumb screws on the bottom of the wedge. And that's how you align with the Fornax Mounts wedge. On the back of the wedge, you'll notice that there is a single hex head screw located on the bottom of the altitude adjustment. This screw controls the tension on the friction pads for the altitude axis. To increase the friction, you tighten up the bolt, and to decrease the friction, you loosen the bolt. Here we have our wedge and our LighTrack II. We'll attach the LighTrack to the wedge using these threaded holes. This is most easily done when the wedge is in a flat orientation at 90 degrees. This provides us with the easiest access to the holes on the bottom of the wedge. The bottom hardware is supplied with the wedge in the form of 2 hex head screws. We simply line up the wedge with the holes on the bottom of the LighTrack and use an Allen key to attach the 2 screws into the bottom of the LighTrack. On the back of the LighTrack is the power input, the autoguider port, and the on and off switch. Additionally, your serial number will be found on the back of the drive arm underneath the polar scope swing arm. You'll notice that there are screw holes along the perimeter of the top of the drive arm. Depending on the iteration of your mount, you might have 3 screw holes around the perimeter, or you may just have 1 at the top. These contain set screws which hold the LighTrack II's stack in a static position. If you ever find that the attachment is rotating back and forth, that means that your set screws need to be tightened. On the bottom of your LighTrack II, you will notice a mini USB port. This port may in the future be used to upgrade the firmware of the mount. You will also notice another opening here on the bottom. Please do not adjust anything through this port, as this is merely for factory adjustment of the LighTrack II. The LighTrack comes with a 12-volt DC power cord. This end of the cord is a 5.5mm outer, 2.1mm inner diameter, center positive connector. This part of the adapter, you'll notice, is a common car outlet style adapter that can connect to a vehicle power source or to one of many commercially available power banks or battery packs. We simply plug the end of the cord into the power input on the LighTrack, plug the other end into our battery, power source, or other type of power bank, flip the switch, and we're in business. So let's get to know our LighTrack II. At the top here we have our mounting thread. This is a 3/8 inch thread, and it's used to mount your ball head or other attachment device. And this is where you'll ride your optics. This thread is connected to the tracking arm of the LighTrack, which swings back and forth through the drive box. Behind the tracking arm, you'll see a black arm. This is a static support for the drive box. And of course we have our polar scope swing arm, which comes out from the back. As your mount tracks, it will move across the tracking arc, and it will rotate the right ascension axis here, tracking the sky. Once it reaches the end, it will hit a micro switch, and that will stop the arm automatically. This status light will blink, letting you know that it has run out of tracking distance and needs to be reset. You simply use the quick slew buttons to reset the mount to the beginning of its arc, and you're ready to start tracking again. On the front of the LighTrack are 4 buttons. The first one controls the speed of tracking, either sidereal, solar, lunar, or half speed. Half speed being a compromise between keeping the foreground from blurring and keeping the stars from trailing. More likely than not, you're going to spend most of your time tracking sidereal, either stacking foreground for Milky Way shots or stacking frames for deep sky objects. The second button controls the north or southern hemisphere, and all this essentially does is reverse the tracking direction that the mount uses. And then on the end here we have our quick slew buttons, which slew the tracking arm back and forth quickly through the drive box. When engaged, please never try and force the tracking arm, as this may damage the drive. One thing you'll notice right away about the LighTrack is the design is different from almost any other telescope mount on the market. The right ascension axis is located quite far away from the drive. In fact, it's about 9 inches point to point. This gives the LighTrack a virtual gear diameter of about 18 inches across. This helps account for its really exceptional tracking accuracy. However, an 18-inch gear would be untenable in a portable product. The LighTrack II gets around this by having a swing arm that moves in between 2 points. It tracks for approximately 107 minutes from point to point before needing to be reset. Resetting is done easily using the quick slew buttons. The other thing that sets the LighTrack apart is that it has a friction drive as opposed to a traditional geared drive. You'll notice that the LighTrack has a smooth channel machined in the tracking arm. This channel is engaged by a very finely machined drive wheel or drive pin inside of the drive box, and that connection allows for a very low periodic error. When tracking with the LighTrack, there's no backlash to worry about, no sloppy gears, and no grease. It's just metal on metal, and it moves in a very precise manner. When engaged, the tracking arm is held very solidly by the drive, and this is what helps the mount track such heavy payloads. For polar alignment, Fornax provides the FMPS-10 illuminated polar scope. It features an illuminated reticle that is appropriate for both the northern and southern hemispheres and does not require the use of a separate app. Additionally, it includes the universal polar scope adapter that allows you to collimate the scope to the LighTrack II. To attach the polar scope, you swing out the arm, and then using the adapter and locking ring, place the polar scope into the swing arm, using the locking ring to tighten up the scope in place. You can adjust the polar scope into any orientation that you like by loosening the locking ring and moving the scope until the reticle is pointing in the direction that you need it. You can also adjust the orientation by swinging the arm almost 360 degrees around the perimeter of the mount. When you're done with your alignment, you can easily remove the polar scope from the swing arm and stow it back in place. Fornax also produces a Polemaster adapter which will allow you to connect your Polemaster to your LighTrack. You simply swing out the polar scope arm, and then using the same locking ring system, attach the adapter to the swing arm of the LighTrack. You'll notice there are 3 holes in the Polemaster adapter. These correspond to the 3 holes in the Polemaster itself. And indeed, the Polemaster comes with 3 screws that will help you attach it to the adapter. During calibration of the Polemaster, the software is going to ask you to move it by a certain number of degrees. If we imagine that this is 0 degrees, this would be 90 degrees, this is a 45 degree rotation, and this is roughly a 30 degree rotation. There's almost a full 360 degrees of rotation available to you, less the amount taken up by the actual arm of the LighTrack II. Now there are a number of ways to mount your gear to the LighTrack. One common way is using a ball head that mounts directly to the 3/8 inch thread on the LighTrack. This thread is common to many different mounting accessories for tripods. In this case, we have a very robust magnesium ball head, as I typically mount very heavy equipment. You don't need to go to this extreme, just make sure that your ball head is rated for the weight that you want to ride on top of it. If you're going to be using a refractor telescope or some other type of large optics, you might want to consider the Fornax Mounts counterbalance kit. It attaches directly to the top of the LighTrack II using the 3/8 inch thread, much like our ball head did. Upon first unpacking your Fornax Mounts FMC 100 counterbalance kit, you'll notice the bar comes in 2 pieces, with quite a long hex head screw that fits inside the distal end of the bar. You'll need the appropriate Allen key that is long enough to reach the screw through the bar in order to attach it to the main part of the counterbalance kit. You can also remove this extension for easy transport when traveling or for attaching additional accessories to the other end of the bar. The counterbalance kit comes with a Vixen clamp, in addition to expandable counterweights to help you adjust it for your particular set of optics. The counterbalance kit uses the common declination and right ascension adjustments that will be familiar to anyone who has used an equatorial telescope mount in the past. This configuration of the counterbalance kit allows you to mount dual optics, either the same or different focal lengths, one on each side of the counterbalance bar. Because why use counterweights when you can use cameras? When using dual optics that are of different weights, you're going to need to make sure that things are balanced across the counterbalance kit. In this case, you'll notice that there are 2 bolts, one on either side of the central attachment. These bolts lock the bar in place, and upon loosening them, you can slide the bar back and forth through the central attachment. The range of your movement is restricted to this flat portion of the bar, which runs almost the entire length. Once you have things adjusted, you merely tighten the locking bolts back. There are a number of ways that you can mount gear to the LighTrack, and in this case, I have a photographic accessory bar from Manfrotto. It attaches to the 3/8 inch thread on the LighTrack, and in this case, it allows me 4 mounting points for different cameras. This can work well as long as you make sure that one end is balanced out by the other end. In this type of configuration, you would be able to orient cameras in various directions. If you're the intrepid type and want to try imaging with multiple different rigs pointed at various different objects, this can be a possibility for you. This type of rig definitely stretches the practicality of things. However, it is pretty fun to do. Now, my preferred way to attach gear to the LighTrack is with a geared head. This allows really fine adjustments of your pointing and helps make object framing really easy, especially at longer focal lengths. Here we have a William Optics Red Cat 51 in the white and gold color, attached to a Canon 6D, and we're going to use this to demonstrate how to mount and orient your objects with the LighTrack. I have a quick release plate attached at a central location on the optics, and this ensures that there's a good balance back and forth. We don't want the front or the back to be overly encumbered, as this might throw off our tracking accuracy. So let's attach our optics to the top of our geared head using the quick release plate. And here we can see that we can easily adjust the direction of pointing using the geared knobs. Now here I've tried to recreate an orientation that might make sense to us standing on flat ground, but one that can actually introduce errors into the LighTrack II's tracking rig. When mounting equipment, it's important to keep the center of gravity as much as possible over the mount and along the right ascension axis. If you mount your equipment standing straight up, it might seem stable at the beginning of your tracking run, but as the mount tracks, it will move the weight of the camera and optics out over the side. And the more this weight moves out over the side, the more it's going to want to act like a lever that will pull down on the mount, potentially causing the drive to stutter. So I highly recommend against mounting things straight up. When mounting, at least try and make sure that your gear is out over the mount a little bit so that you can more evenly distribute the weight over the mount's center of gravity. Because once you pull things out to the side, it just becomes a lever that can cause some tracking errors. Now in this type of orientation, you can see that things are mounted much more evenly over the right ascension axis, and this helps to preserve the center of gravity of the mount. When the mount tracks, things don't move out to either side, but rather the center of gravity stays central to the mount. This balanced payload really helps the LighTrack II do the best job it possibly can. And that is your overview of the LighTrack II. I hope you found it informative.